The judge certainly did everything.
Here's the former president, now a convicted felon 34 times, about to address reporters.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA.
Okay, so what just happened in that federal courtroom is absolutely brutal, and I need you to understand how devastating this moment is for President Trump's entire legal strategy across every single case he's facing. A federal judge just delivered a methodical, systematic takedown of Trump's legal arguments, dismantling every major defense his team presented, one by one, in real time, with media packed into the courtroom, watching every excruciating moment unfold. This wasn't a close call or a mixed ruling where Trump lost on some points but won on others. This was a complete and total demolition of everything Trump's lawyers tried to argue, with the judge openly rebuking them for presenting questionable evidence, accusing them of gaming the system, and issuing stark warnings about potential sanctions and disbarment that could end their legal careers permanently. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And the whole thing, we didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now, from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one.
The courtroom atmosphere was absolutely electric with tension as the judge worked through Trump's arguments systematically and rejected each one with increasingly harsh language. Trump's claims of presidential immunity rejected and called legally baseless. His arguments about unfair process dismissed as without merit and contradicted by the record. His allegations of fabricated evidence against him thrown out after the judge demanded proof that his lawyers couldn't provide. Every single pillar of Trump's defense strategy crumbled under judicial scrutiny, leaving his legal team scrambling to respond and visibly shaken by the comprehensive defeat they just suffered in front of the entire country. The judge's language was extraordinarily harsh, even by the standards of contentious legal proceedings involving high-profile defendants. They told Trump's lawyers directly that there are real consequences for trying to abuse the legal system, making clear that the aggressive tactics Trump's team has employed throughout these proceedings would no longer be tolerated without consequence. They halted the proceedings at one point and demanded that Trump's lawyers prove the legitimacy of evidence they had submitted, threatening immediate sanctions if they couldn't deliver that proof right there in the courtroom. The message was unmistakable. This court will not be manipulated, misled, or gamed by attorneys who think their clients' fame and power put them above the rules that govern everyone else. Can you believe this? A federal judge essentially told Trump's legal team that they've been lying to the court, presenting dubious evidence, and abusing legal processes, and that continuing down this path will destroy their careers and result in serious professional and potentially criminal consequences. Court observers described the judge's public statement as absolutely scorching, drawing a clear line against the aggressive delay tactics and misleading arguments that have characterized Trump's legal strategy for years across multiple cases and jurisdictions. One prosecutor said afterward that if you try to railroad the legal system with questionable evidence, expect consequences, and this judge just demonstrated exactly what those consequences look like in devastating fashion. Trump's attorneys were completely blindsided by the ferocity and comprehensiveness of the judge's rejection of their arguments. Legal commentators watching the proceedings described them as effectively committing legal suicide, by persisting with discredited defenses that any competent attorney would have abandoned long ago. They kept pushing arguments that had already been rejected in other courts, presenting evidence that couldn't withstand basic scrutiny, and employing delay tactics that the judge saw through immediately and refused to tolerate any longer. The threat of sanctions and possible bar complaints sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the broader legal community watching these proceedings unfold. Sanctions can include fines, but bar complaints are career-ending territory for attorneys. If Trump's lawyers face formal disciplinary proceedings based on their conduct in this case, they could lose their licenses to practice law entirely. That threat changes the calculus for every attorney considering whether to represent Trump or employ aggressive tactics on his behalf. The message is clear: helping Trump abuse the legal system will cost you your career and potentially your freedom if the misconduct rises to criminal levels. Legal experts are saying this ruling could influence upcoming Trump cases nationwide by establishing a template for how judges should handle his legal team's tactics. Other judges presiding over Trump-related matters have been watching to see how their colleagues handle the aggressive delay strategies, questionable evidence submissions, and misleading arguments that characterize Trump's approach to litigation. This ruling empowers those judges to clamp down hard and demand higher standards from Trump's attorneys in every future proceeding. The days of Trump's team running roughshod over courts through sheer aggression and willingness to push boundaries may finally be coming to an end as judges across the country follow this example. The implications for Trump's pending cases are enormous and potentially catastrophic for his legal survival. His defense strategy has been built on delay, deflection, and aggressive argument, wearing down prosecutors, exhausting court resources, and hoping that some combination of legal maneuvers and political pressure would eventually let him escape accountability. This judge just demonstrated that courts can and will reject that entire approach comprehensively. Every defense Trump planned to use in this case has been demolished. Every tactic his team employed has been called out and sanctioned. The playbook that worked for Trump in civil litigation for decades is failing completely in the criminal and constitutional context he now faces. So we're going to break down exactly what happened in that courtroom, which specific arguments the judge rejected and why, what the sanctions threats mean for Trump's legal team, and how this ruling could affect every other case Trump is facing across the country. This is a legal reckoning that exposes Trump's entire courtroom strategy as built on sand, and now that foundation is collapsing with potentially devastating consequences for his freedom and his future. All right, let's dig into the details of this courtroom demolition, because understanding exactly which arguments the judge rejected and why reveals just how comprehensive this defeat is for Trump and how it threatens his entire legal strategy across multiple cases and jurisdictions. We need to start with the specific claims Trump's team made and how the judge systematically dismantled each one, because the methodical nature of this takedown is what makes it so devastating and precedent-setting for future proceedings involving Trump and his attorneys. The first major argument Trump's lawyers presented was presidential immunity, the claim that Trump cannot be prosecuted or held legally accountable for actions taken while he was president because the office itself provides absolute protection from legal consequences. This has been a cornerstone of Trump's defense strategy across multiple cases, and his team has pushed increasingly expansive versions of this immunity claim as his legal troubles have mounted. The judge rejected this argument completely and called it legally baseless given existing precedent and constitutional text. They noted that no court has ever accepted the sweeping immunity claims Trump's team was making, that the Constitution doesn't provide for absolute presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, and that accepting such claims would place presidents above the law in ways the founders never intended, and that would be dangerous for democratic governance. The second major argument involved claims of unfair process, allegations that Trump was being treated differently than other defendants, that procedures were being manipulated to disadvantage him, and that the prosecution was politically motivated rather than based on legitimate legal concerns. Trump's team presented this as evidence that the entire proceeding was tainted and should be dismissed or substantially limited in scope. The judge dismissed these claims as without merit and directly contradicted by the record of the proceedings themselves. They pointed out that Trump had received every procedural protection available to any defendant, that his team had been given extensive time and resources to prepare their defense, and that claims of unfair treatment were not supported by any actual evidence of procedural irregularities or bias in how the case had been handled by the court. The third major argument involved allegations of fabricated evidence, claims that prosecutors had manufactured or manipulated evidence against Trump to support charges that weren't based on his actual conduct. This is an explosive allegation that, if true, would represent serious prosecutorial misconduct, warranting dismissal of charges and potentially criminal consequences for the prosecutors involved. Trump's team has made versions of this claim repeatedly in public statements and legal filings, suggesting that evidence against him has been doctored, taken out of context, or simply invented by political enemies determined to destroy him. The judge's response to this argument was particularly harsh and consequential for Trump's attorneys personally. They demanded that Trump's lawyers provide proof of their fabrication allegations right there in the courtroom, specific evidence showing that prosecutors had manufactured or manipulated the materials they were relying on. When Trump's attorneys couldn't produce that proof, the judge threw out the fabrication claims entirely and warned that making such serious allegations without evidentiary support constitutes misconduct that could result in sanctions and bar complaints against the attorneys involved. This exchange was devastating because it exposed Trump's fabrication claims as rhetorical attacks rather than legitimate legal arguments supported by actual evidence of wrongdoing. The judge then turned to the broader pattern of conduct by Trump's legal team throughout these proceedings, and their assessment was absolutely scathing in its directness and severity. They accused Trump's lawyers of gaming the system through delay tactics designed to postpone proceedings rather than achieve legitimate legal objectives. They called out the submission of questionable evidence that couldn't withstand basic scrutiny when challenged. They identified a pattern of misleading arguments that misrepresented facts, precedents, and legal standards in ways that bordered on deliberate deception of the court. The judge made clear that this pattern of conduct would no longer be tolerated and that continuing down this path would result in serious professional consequences for every attorney involved. The sanctions threat the judge issued carries enormous weight for Trump's legal team and for any attorney considering whether to represent him using similar tactics in the future. Sanctions can include monetary fines, but more importantly, they can include referrals to bar associations for disciplinary proceedings that could result in suspension or permanent disbarment. An attorney who loses their license to practice law has effectively had their career destroyed. They can no longer represent clients, appear in court, or earn a living in the profession they trained for. By threatening sanctions explicitly and publicly, this judge put Trump's entire legal team on notice that their careers are at stake if they continue employing tactics the court views as abusive and improper. The judge's public statement following the ruling was described by court observers as one of the most scorching judicial rebukes they'd ever witnessed in a high-profile case involving a former president. The judge drew a clear line against aggressive tactics that abuse legal processes, making explicit that courts exist to adjudicate legitimate disputes based on evidence and law, not to be manipulated by wealthy and powerful defendants who think they can game the system through sheer aggression and willingness to push ethical boundaries. They vowed stricter standards for all future hearings involving Trump's legal team, putting attorneys on notice that every filing, every argument, and every piece of evidence will be scrutinized carefully, and that misconduct will be punished swiftly and severely. The reaction from Trump's attorneys in the courtroom told its own story about how devastating this defeat was for their client and their strategy. Legal commentators watching the proceedings described them as effectively committing legal suicide by persisting with discredited defenses long after any competent attorney would have recognized they were failing and adjusted course accordingly. They appeared blindsided by the comprehensiveness of the judge's rejection, visibly shaken by the sanctions threats, and uncertain how to respond to a ruling that left them with virtually no viable arguments remaining in their arsenal. One observer said the legal team looked like they'd been hit by a truck and didn't know which way to turn for safety. The precedent this ruling sets for other judges handling Trump-related cases is significant and could reshape how courts nationwide approach his legal team's tactics going forward. Judges communicate with each other informally and watch how their colleagues handle difficult cases and aggressive litigants. This ruling demonstrates that comprehensive rejection of Trump's arguments is not only legally justified, but professionally appropriate. That judges can and should call out misconduct, threaten sanctions, and demand higher standards from attorneys who abuse legal processes. Other judges who may have been hesitant to take such aggressive action now have a template and peer validation for doing so in their own proceedings. The implications extend beyond Trump himself to everyone in his orbit who faces legal jeopardy and might be tempted to employ similar tactics. If delay, deflection, and aggressive argument no longer work, if courts are going to reject these approaches comprehensively and punish the attorneys who employ them, then the entire defensive playbook Trump has relied on for decades becomes worthless. Attorneys will be reluctant to risk their careers representing Trump if doing so requires employing tactics that could get them sanctioned or disbarred. Co-defendants will be less willing to maintain solidarity if coordinated legal strategies are failing across the board. The legal isolation Trump faces will only intensify as this ruling's implications ripple through the legal community. The broader message this judge sent about judicial tolerance for abuse of legal process matters for American jurisprudence beyond just Trump's cases. Courts depend on attorneys acting in good faith, presenting legitimate arguments, and submitting authentic evidence. When those norms break down, the entire legal system suffers because courts can't function effectively if they have to treat every filing and argument as potentially fraudulent or misleading. This judge's aggressive response to Trump's team's conduct reinforces those norms and signals that courts will protect themselves and the integrity of legal proceedings, even when doing so requires confronting powerful defendants and their well-resourced legal teams directly and publicly. Okay, let's break this down into clear points so everyone understands exactly what happened in that courtroom and why this ruling represents such a devastating defeat for Trump's legal strategy across all his pending cases. Point number 1, the judge rejected every single major argument Trump's team presented, leaving them with no viable legal defenses remaining in this case and demonstrating the weakness of claims they've been making across multiple jurisdictions for months and years. Presidential immunity claims, rejected as legally baseless and unsupported by constitutional text or precedent. Unfair process claims, dismissed as contradicted by the actual record of proceedings that shows Trump received every protection available to any defendant. Fabricated evidence claims, thrown out after Trump's lawyers couldn't produce any proof to support their explosive allegations against prosecutors. Each of these arguments has been central to Trump's defense strategy across multiple cases, and this judge's comprehensive rejection of all of them suggests other courts are likely to reach similar conclusions when these same arguments are presented in other proceedings. The legal foundation Trump has been building his defense on is crumbling, and this ruling accelerates that collapse dramatically by providing a detailed roadmap for how and why these arguments fail under serious judicial scrutiny. Point number 2, the sanctions threats the judge issued put Trump's entire legal team on notice that their careers are at risk if they continue employing tactics the court views as abusive and improper. Sanctions can include monetary fines, but the real threat is referral to bar associations for disciplinary proceedings that could result in suspension or permanent disbarment for attorneys involved in misconduct. Losing a law license is career destruction. Attorneys who are disbarred cannot represent clients, appear in court, or practice the profession they trained for and build their careers around. By threatening sanctions explicitly and publicly, this judge changed the calculus for every attorney currently representing Trump and every attorney considering whether to join his legal team in the future. The message is clear: helping Trump abuse the legal system through delay tactics, questionable evidence, and misleading arguments will cost you your career and potentially your freedom if the misconduct rises to criminal levels. Point number 3, the judges demand that Trump's lawyers prove their fabrication allegations on the spot, expose those claims as rhetorical attacks rather than legitimate legal arguments supported by actual evidence. Trump's team has been claiming for months that evidence against him has been manufactured, doctored, or manipulated by political enemies determined to destroy him. These claims play well in political messaging and with Trump's base, but they require actual proof to function as legal arguments in court proceedings. When the judge demanded that proof and Trump's lawyers couldn't produce it, the fabrication claims collapsed entirely, and the attorneys who made them were exposed to potential sanctions for making serious allegations they couldn't support with evidence. This exchange demonstrates the fundamental difference between political rhetoric and legal argument. Courts require proof, and claims without evidence will be rejected and potentially punished. Point number 4. The judge's public statement establishes new standards for how courts should handle aggressive litigation tactics and puts the entire legal community on notice about consequences for abusive process. The scorching language the judge used, calling out delay tactics, questioning evidence legitimacy, threatening professional consequences, signals that courts will actively police attorney conduct rather than passively tolerating abuse. This creates precedent that other judges can follow and cite when confronting similar tactics in their own proceedings involving Trump or other aggressive litigants. The days of Trump's team running roughshod over courts through sheer willingness to push boundaries may be ending as judges nationwide adopt stricter standards and more aggressive responses to misconduct. Point number 5, Trump's attorneys being blindsided and left speechless by this ruling reveals how unprepared they were for serious judicial scrutiny and how dependent their strategy has been on courts tolerating conduct that this judge refused to accept. Legal commentators describe Trump's lawyers as effectively committing legal suicide by persisting with discredited defenses that any competent attorney would have abandoned when it became clear they were failing. Their visible shock and disarray in the courtroom suggests they genuinely believe their aggressive tactics would work as they have in previous civil litigation contexts, where Trump's wealth and willingness to fight indefinitely often wore down opponents. Criminal and constitutional proceedings operate differently, and judges in these contexts have less tolerance for delay tactics and misleading arguments than Trump's team apparently expected or prepared for adequately. Point number 6. This ruling could influence every pending Trump case by empowering other judges to clamp down on similar tactics and demand higher standards from his legal team in all future proceedings nationwide. Judges watch how their colleagues handle difficult cases and aggressive litigants, looking for guidance on appropriate responses to misconduct and validation for taking strong action when warranted. This ruling provides both a detailed template for rejecting Trump's arguments comprehensively and peer validation for threatening sanctions against attorneys who employ abusive tactics. Other judges who may have been hesitant to take aggressive action now have precedent and professional support for doing so in their own proceedings. So where does this leave us right now after this devastating courtroom defeat for Trump? Every major legal argument his team presented has been rejected as baseless, unsupported, or contradicted by the record of actual proceedings. His attorneys face potential sanctions and bar complaints that could end their careers if they continue employing tactics the court views as abusive. The fabrication claims Trump has been making for months have been exposed as rhetorical attacks without evidentiary support. The judge has established new standards for scrutiny that other courts are likely to follow in pending cases across multiple jurisdictions. And Trump's legal team has been left visibly shaken and uncertain how to proceed after having their entire playbook demolished in a single brutal hearing. This is what happens when aggressive litigation tactics meet a judge who refuses to be manipulated or intimidated by powerful defendants and their well-resourced legal teams. Trump has spent decades using delay, deflection, and aggressive argument to avoid accountability in civil litigation, wearing down opponents, exhausting resources, and escaping consequences through sheer persistence and willingness to fight indefinitely. That playbook is failing completely in the criminal and constitutional context he now faces, where judges have less tolerance for abuse and more tools to punish it effectively. The implications for Trump's remaining cases are severe and potentially catastrophic for his legal survival and his freedom. If other judges follow this example, and legal experts expect many will, Trump faces a judicial environment where his standard tactics no longer work and his attorneys risk their careers by employing them. The legal isolation will only intensify as attorneys become reluctant to represent him using methods that could get them sanctioned or disbarred for professional misconduct. Co-defendants will be less willing to maintain solidarity if coordinated strategies are failing everywhere they're tried. This ruling represents a legal reckoning that's been building for years as Trump pushed boundaries further and further, assuming courts would ultimately defer to his wealth, power, and aggressive tactics. This judge just demonstrated comprehensively that assumption was wrong, that courts will protect themselves and the integrity of legal proceedings, that misconduct has consequences, and that no defendant is too powerful to be held accountable for abusing the legal system. Keep watching Trump's cases closely because this ruling will ripple through every proceeding he faces. Are you kidding me? This is the most comprehensive judicial takedown of a legal defense strategy we've seen in a case of this magnitude, and it changes everything about Trump's path forward.